man, there are times where you're just like, man, I'm going to give a consequence. Because I know why you did this. And it's like, ooh, stop, listen, actually hear what they're saying.
Welcome, everyone, to the Full Life Podcast by Grace Church, where we hope to inspire, challenge, and clarify your next steps in faith as you pursue the full life that God has for you. I'm David Lawson, and today we're going to be talking about a really important topic, especially if you're a parent, and it's about parenting. It's about raising kids in today's culture, and I know all of us are looking for ways that we can be investing in our kids in a way that they grow up to be people who own their faith and are a light to those who are around them. Now, today's podcast came out of a sermon series that we just completed here at Grace called You Asked For It. And during that series, we answered a lot of questions related to the Christian faith. And if you happen to miss any of those sermons, you can always go to Grace for Ohio and you can catch up with that. But one of the questions that came in was a question related to parenting and how do I raise my kids in today's culture? And to help me answer this question today, I have Tim Boucher with us, who is our Grace Kids Director. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, good to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because I don't know that I could answer this question very effectively. Let's start by just kind of restating the question as it came in, because every parent feels this tension, don't we, about how do we raise our kids in a culture in grace and truth? We don't want to err on either side of it. And I know that in our conversation today, we're going to be learning about how do we address this question in grace and in truth. And so the question that came in began with probably a one-word prayer: help.
That's right.
I think that's a prayer that almost every parent has prayed, right?
Absolutely. Well, and you had 3 kids and have 3 kids, and I have 4. And boy, we do some of these things for a living, and it's still sometimes you just cry out to God, just please help. Need wisdom, need clarity.
So I thought that was really appropriate. Help.
Absolutely.
How do we raise kids in a culture that normalizes things like homosexuality? And I know that's kind of a hot topic, but I think it's representative of how do we raise our kids in a culture that doesn't necessarily embrace and hold our values? And then the question goes on with the heart of the question, the person who's asking the question. We want to teach truth while showing compassion. I like that part because that's really important. So when you get a question like this, how do you begin processing it? What are some things what's the drop-down menu that goes off in your mind about how do you go about answering this question?
Well, and just like we talked about in that message, I think the biggest thing is it comes down to what's the filter that we're using, because it's so easy with so much media and streaming TV and our phones, and you can Google something really fast, that we have to remember that the Bible is where we need to go back to. Do we have a biblical filter in our parenting and all of our life? But is that the key? Because there's a whole lot of how-tos and other things that we can go to. But the first thing that goes to my mind is, "Dear Jesus, give us wisdom." That's right. The Proverbs is full of that. If you seek it, you'll find it. And so, that would be the biggest thing for me.
I like that because there's this principle and conceptual base, there's this heart side of things that we have to be processing as a parent, as well as the skills side of things. So when you think about filters, I don't know how many you necessarily have in mind. You talked about 3 of them, I think, on that Sunday morning. But what is the first filter that you are thinking about when you start answering a question like this or thinking about how do we raise our kids in today's culture?
Sure. Yeah, I think what it comes to is sometimes we want the how-to and we want check boxes to go through. And I think we really need to take a step back and look in the mirror, right? We need to look at ourselves. And that's why we said that day, and I would say again today, it's how do we model it? How are we living in front of our kids? And backing up a step, just how are we living? Where are we with Jesus? It's Ephesians 5:1. It talks about follow God's example, or an older translation says be an imitator of God. And to me, that's where it's at, is am I looking like Jesus? and I'm not going to be perfect. I'm still going to be sinful. I'm going to make mistakes. But am I looking like Jesus in front of my kids? To my kids, it's been my desire from before I had children, for even my wife, was that she sees, and then my kids see the same person at the ball game, that they see the same person at the dinner table, they see the same person in the house, at church, when he's at work, that Tim would be the same guy everywhere, that they would say he's seeking after God. He's not perfect. He doesn't have it all together. He's figuring it out. But, that, I think that's the biggest thing is, are we imitating God in front of our kids?
So what kind of investments do I need to make in order to set that example for my kids and for my family?
Sure. Yeah. I think one is, how are you taking care of your soul? What are you doing? I love John 15, where it says over and over again, Jesus is speaking. And when he says something and he repeats it, we really better lean in and listen.
Right.
And he says over and over again, remain in me, remain in me, remain in me. And how are we doing? How are we spending time with Jesus? And I get that that's hard, right? I mean, we say that and it's like, well, of course, we should read our Bible and we should pray. Right. But sometimes it's, how do we find creative ways to do that? I was just talking with a dad just a week or so ago, and he's like, man, I don't really have time, and I've got a couple kids, and they're young, and life's crazy. And then he told me that he had a 45-minute commute to work. And I told him, I said, I have about a 7 to 10-minute commute to work. I said, and sometimes I just put scripture on and listen to it. I mean, we have all these apps. Let's use them for good. Right. And find those little moments to remain in Jesus, and you don't have to listen to it the whole time. You take a moment to listen to a song, or just sit in silence for a minute and just say, God help, like the original prayer that the person had in the question, to just take a moment to pause and listen to God, and just sit in his presence, so to speak. Yeah.
Actually, I was just talking to a young dad just this morning, and we were talking about this. I told him I was going to have this conversation with you. And he said, one of the things, and you got to kind of go after this, how you're wired. Right. But he talked about the discipline side of things. And usually when we think about discipline and parenting, we're thinking about the kids' side. But he said, no, my discipline, he said, when I began disciplining myself to get up earlier in the morning, go to bed when the kids went to bed, because he has young children, and then get up in the morning, he said, that has made all the difference in the world. Because when I'm getting up before everybody else, then that makes it, that's his time. And so I think what I'm kind of hearing you saying is that we need to look at our day and where are those natural times where we can make that investment, not try to force our schedule to fit that time, but allow that time to fit our schedule, because there are realities. If you have if you have a child that's waking up every 2 hours, at night,
it's hard.
You need to figure out where I'm going to get my sleep so I can be my best. But there's probably those other natural times during the day, right, that we can take advantage of.
Yeah. And I think along those lines is a lot of times as young parents, you think, well, when they get older and they're more independent, I'll have more time. Well, then you're taking them to games and activities, and there's other things that are filling it up. And so I think I like how you said that. You have to find the moments in your pace, in your rhythm. Some of them you have to force it in there to make it happen. But find those things that work in your, kind of your groove, your rhythm of life. Yep.
And when you talk about this integrity side, being the same person, our words are a big thing in our example.
Yes.
What are some thoughts you have about that? Because I know you and I have talked about that before, and that consistency, especially if you have kids in sports. Sometimes when you're away from the house, you become a different. Who is that person? I don't know.
I have had some moments where I've had to go home to my kids and say, I shouldn't have said that to the referee.
I was right, but I shouldn't have said it that way. Right?
Yeah, we have a phrase. It's funny, not best at our house. We say that. Not the best thing. Probably shouldn't have said it. Yeah, it might have been funny or might have been even true, but it's not that, and I think honestly, apologizing and saying you're sorry, whether that's by a behavior that they see, or we're going to have times where, I spoke strongly to one of my kids, and it was like, what? They needed discipline. They needed a consequence, but they didn't need me to raise my voice at them or those kind of things. And it goes a long way to just admit, hey, by the way, I was wrong. Yeah, I'm sorry. And you're also then modeling for your child what you're asking them to do with their siblings or with you, and it's not the reason you do it because you're actually sorry. But I think doing that hey, when you blow it, you tell them. this is a mistake, and this is what I'm doing about it. I've talked with my kids about, hey, I'm encouraging you as they became teenagers to have accountability. I said, I've got guys that I talk to and I meet with that hold me accountable into the Word, in purity, in all these things. I said, I'm not asking you to do something that I'm not doing.
Right.
And letting your kids see, even in your weakness, that God can use that, and that you are just building good network shows them, it models for them what you're asking them to do.
Yeah, I like that, because what you're saying is I am held to the same standard that you are.
That's right.
The standard that we're setting in our house is one that all of us need to comply to. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows when I've blown it in the house, so I might as well admit it, because everyone knows.
That's right.
And when you're able to do that, when you're able to have that level of transparency, then and modeling that, Lord willing, that kind of transparency will carry over with your children, and they'll be able to develop that trust toward that standard that we're all trying to establish.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, with that, Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
I see a lot of families walk in the door, and there have been times where you can even see the family in the car yelling at each other, and they come in, and it's like, oh, praise Jesus, great to see you, Pastor Dave, I think showing the kids see those things.
Yeah.
They pick up on it, and they hear that, man, you're not practicing what you're preaching, and you're not being real, or, and those things. And we just need to be careful how we live in front of our kids. They see things. They get it. They know us maybe better than we know ourselves sometimes. And so, we need to
and that helps
well.
pass on authentic faith too.
That's
It's not just
exactly
something
right.
I'm putting on for a particular time, particular location, for particular people. It's something that it's authentic for me. It means something to me.
That's a good word.
So model it. That's your first filter that you're thinking about. What's the next one you're thinking about?
Sure. I think that the next one is listen well. I think of Proverbs 1, verse 5. It says, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. And I think often in the busyness of parenting, you're working in the home, you're trying to do all of these things, and life is coming at you, and your kid says something, and you're like, well, just go do what you have to do, or, because I said so, and those kind of things. And really stopping ourselves to say, am I shepherding their heart? Am I trying to train them to be a Christ follower with that, biblical grid or filter? Or am I just trying to get a certain behavior out of them? And I think we need to begin to become really good listeners, to really hear what they're saying.
That's interesting that you're saying this. I mean, I think it's kind of, we're all nodding our heads. Oh, yeah, of course I got to do that. But usually when we think about listening for learning, we're thinking about it from somebody who's ahead of us, like a mentor or a coach or something. And what you're advising us here wisely is that if I want to be the person who's leading and coaching and mentoring, even though I have more life experience, I need to be listening to those that I'm trying to lead in order to get better at what I'm trying to do.
Sure. Well, and there was one time in the not so distant past where my son had come home late past curfew. And we were maybe a little upset with him. We're kind of getting on him a little bit, and he's like, can I talk? And we're like, you were late, you're kind of leaning in. And he's like, really, can I tell you what I was doing? And it ended up, and it was true, he was talking to a friend who was really struggling and was considering taking his own life and this other thing. And so when we actually listened to him, we're like, oh, well, good job, man. And then we could also give a tool, because we listened, and we could say, it would take you 5 seconds to pull your phone out and say, hey, running late, I promise you, I'll explain when I get home. It's like, that would have solved a whole world of, and so we could actually, because we stopped and listened, but man, there are times where you're just like, man, I'm going to give a consequence. I'm going to, because I know why you did this. And it's like, ooh, stop, listen, actually hear what they're saying.
Right.
Because it will help you understand their perspective. We're supposed to do that in our marriages and other relationships.
Yeah.
I like what you said. We need to listen and learn to those that are younger than us.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the value of friends. Of course, this is something that always comes up when you're talking about kids, especially as they're getting older, and the influence of friendships. What are you thinking about? Because I know our homes are open. We try to have kids over and so forth. What are you listening for there?
Yeah. And I think it's good to observe. when you're out and you're at those different activities that your kids are involved with, or when your kids are younger, you're at the school for if you can get in there and get in the classroom and observe. Kids sometimes don't think adults can hear. Hopefully they aren't listening to this podcast right now, right? We'll let a secret out, but sometimes they're talking and they have no idea that the adult that's there hears what they're saying. And we just need to listen to how are they talking to each other. There have been times where we've had to talk to one of our kids and say, hey, we've heard how your friend talks about their mom or their dad, or we've heard how they respond to them on the phone. Just want you to know you're going to still hang out with them, but we're starting to hear some of that at our house. And you can understand, you hear things. And frankly, you learn their slang and their language because,
don't know what it means, but you're hearing it.
You don't. You can Google it, though.
You can
you
Google
just
it.
Put it in there. I've done that more than once. And then you find out, what apps they're on and, who they're hanging out with. And you get to know their friends a little bit just by listening and hearing and asking questions of. So tell me a little bit about, whoever that friend is.
Yeah.
And
you talked about apps. That made me think about culture because culture is so huge. Our kids are listening to culture all the time.
Yes.
It's coming their ways. It's coming through their friends and so forth. What are your thoughts about that? What are we listening for in the culture? What are some tips you can give to us about that?
Sure. Well, one thing I would say, we'll put a link to this so they can see. We did a video about this. Becca Harbaugh did not too long ago that talked about technology and those things and staying on top of it. It's changing all the time. But the advantage, maybe even from when my kids first started to get it compared to now, an advantage now is there are so many guards that you can put up on your kids' phones and use the parental controls. Just because they tell you that every other kid has an iPhone doesn't mean your kid needs an iPhone at that age. And if they have one, maybe you're putting serious limits on it so that there's not, but know the apps that your kids are on. It is not wrong to check your, I would be open with them. We tell our kids, we're going to check your phone. And so you can see in their text messages or other things. That's not wrong. That's your responsibility.
I'm glad you said that. That's so empowering because I think parents are so intimidated about this, and they don't want to get on the wrong side. And there's something that's a battle they don't want to, all that kind of stuff that when it's uncomfortable, we need empowerment, we need that encouragement. So thank you for that. I think that's very helpful.
And we need to be careful with it. I'd put a guard in there to not then be the helicopter parent who isn't ever giving them freedom in those things, and you're checking it every night, and you're never trusting. If they give you a reason not to trust, you're checking more. And we've told our kids that. But at the same time, take that responsibility. If we're going to do what it says in Proverbs to train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it, we need to put those guards in. And so knowing what they're on, learning about it, the schools have good options for that. Our youth team is fantastic. Pastor Billy and Sean and the rest of their team, are great with the. I often go to them and say, "Talk to me about this app," because they know it before I do, and those things, and really lean on us because we're happy to help.
Yeah, I think this is a place where parents can get lost very quickly.
Absolutely,
and we do have a team of people here at the church who are ready, available, they're up on it, and they can provide you with the help. So you talked about the on our YouTube channel, this playlist, parenting, I think it's called Parenting Support or something like that. And there are other videos besides this one that are on there that will help people. What are some other resources that you would point people to that would help them here?
Sure. Our curriculum is amazing that we use. It's called Orange. With Grace Kids, and they also do things for youth. There's a Parent Q app where you can see everything that we're talking about in Grace Kids on Sunday morning. They can see that. There's other resources. They have blogs, all sorts of parenting resources that they have. The Parent Q app is so good. And then I don't know if a lot of people know this, but we have a church library down by the worship center, by Traditional, across the hall there. And in there are books for every phase, from 0 through 18-year-olds, and every book goes through. You can check it out of the library for the age of your child, and you learn what is a sixth grader thinking about? What kind of books should they be reading? What are questions that they're asking? And as we're listening, we're not just listening to our kids, not just listening to their friends and the culture. We're listening to, all right, this is their phase. We're getting some good knowledge to learn. And there's some other resources too, that if you have a strong-willed child, there's a good book about that. that. There's some good resources down there too that would be worth everyone's time.
I do think the Strong-Willed Child book is well used. I think it's pretty dog-eared.
Yes, absolutely.
I think people have taken advantage of that. So yeah, those are good resources. And don't be afraid to use resources and talk to people. Talk to people who are ahead of you. Talk
That's
to
right.
your pastor. Talk about
Absolutely.
your Grace Kids Direct, other people who can help, because people are willing to help. You know, you're not meant to carry this alone.
Yep. And I made it a goal of mine, it was probably 6 months ago. I just made a list of some men that I'm like, I need to get beside them, that are a little older than I am, that, they probably are more in the grandparent stage and some of those things, just to say, man, I want to learn. I'm moving. I have some adult kids and some kids still in school, and I can't say enough about how, and they're willing to share. We just have to ask them.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that Sunday morning, you talked about 3 filters. I think one was modeling, one was listening. What was the third one?
The third one's guiding them.
Okay.
That it's good to listen, and we need to model it. And some parents do that well. I mean, some people bring the iron fist, right? They're going to do it, and they're ready to guide. But some people need to make sure that we're shepherding our kids' heart. I mentioned that earlier, but I can't say enough about it. We can get kids to behave. We can kind of force that. We can give serious consequences that make that happen. But what we really want are adult children that love Jesus and are leading their families well and have integrity in the workplace and those things. And so, I think that one of the big ones there is praying for your kids. There's a great resource. It's Praying Circles Around Your Children by Mark Batterson, a book that is gold. Whether you like to read or not, you should read this book. It's not a hard read, but it just really talks about the importance of praying for and with your kids. Yeah. And it's never too late to start that. And
my wife adopted this practice when our kids were young, still does it. And when she's reading the scripture, and of course, she's reading for herself, but when there's something that reminds her of one of our kids or a way that she wants to be praying, she just puts their initials by it. And then every time she comes across that, she's praying for that child, even our adult children and their spouses, and now our grandchildren. There are initials by those verses, and she prays through those verses that way for that child.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Yep.
What else about, you talked about prayer. What else when it comes to shepherding?
I think, seizing the teachable moment. I think, one, being intentional, with prayer and the time that you're spending and those things of, really saying, when I'm home, be home. That a lot of people are on their phones or they're still working or they get distracted by what they have to do around the house. And if your kids are young, get on the floor and play with them. They're only young for a short time. Yeah. And get down there and have some fun with them. And I think too, the dinner table. I was talking with a young man recently who said, I can't remember hardly a time where we ate dinner together around the table. Yeah. And we don't get to do it all the time. Right. But boy, it's good. Yeah. Eventually it turns on you because your kids get older and it starts to tease you a little bit. Yeah. And those kind of things. So, but boy, it's so good. And sometimes it's absolutely nothing, but you're together. Yeah. And then there's other times where things come up or you have opportunities to pray together as a family, have a time to eat together. Yeah. But really being intentional in figuring out your kids. And that goes back to the phases. My kid at this phase, what do they want? Well, maybe they're not playing with dolls anymore. Right. But now it's, okay, I need to go have some daddy-daughter dates, or I need to take my son out and play ball. Or, things change, but really being intentional that way.
And I think being intentional, whenever I feel like I need to be intentional, might be a good time to put down my phone or to put away a screen, because sometimes we ask this, when's a good time to do this? And I want to be, out of touch or whatever. But when I know I need to be intentional, remove the distractions that allow me to be intentional, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, and then eventually your kids pick up on it, because it wasn't too long ago on this one either. And my one of my kids said, Dad, no phones at the table, because I had checked a text, and I was like,
it's probably a text from me.
probably was. It was probably Dave. And I'm like, I should be ignoring Dave right now.
You should be ignoring
Dave would actually be upset with me if he knew that I had checked his text.
Yeah. And that intentionality goes to our presence, just being present with our kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been kind of your scriptural guiding principle when it comes to
absolutely.
being present.
I think I've always been a as you walk along dad. That we have set times where I've prayed with my kids before school and those things, and we have time in the we did a short Bible story before bed, and still pray with my kids before bed. And I would say it's just as you're walking along. I think in Deuteronomy 6, I love where it starts. I want to start in verse 4 because it says, "The Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength," which I like because that goes back to modeling, right? That I need to be in love with Jesus. And then it says, "These commandments I give you today, they are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up." Now I think it's, before school, when you're taking them to the game, when you're on the way home from, that activity, when you're on the way to grandma and grandpa's house, if you take your kid to childcare in the morning, wherever it is at the dinner table, while you're walking along. And sometimes those are incredible conversations because someone out there is going to be like, "Well, Tim, we've had dinner 3 days in a row and nothing good came up." Yeah, but it might be the fourth one.
Right.
Or it may be the 100th one.
Yeah.
But because you have that time, boy, have your eyes open. Because if you're really listening, then you're going to grab that teachable moment.
Yeah, amen. That's right. It's hard to talk about shepherding without talking about discipline.
Absolutely.
Big question.
Huge.
I think if there was one thing, and it's a fault of us parents, isn't it? If there's one thing that we would really want to have talked about and someone to figure out for us, it's the discipline side. All these things you've talked about, though, are so critical for that component.
That's right.
Because if you're modeling and if you're listening, you're going to be in a better position, aren't you, on the whole discipline side? So talk to us a little bit about, you can't solve all of our problems.
No.
But tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about the discipline. How do you guide people with that?
Sure. And the first thing I'd say is what you just mentioned. I know you can't solve all the problems, and I think we want a set formula. I have 4 children, and I've had to discipline and raise them 4 different ways because it's all the same principles. It's all the same grid, same filter that way, but every child needs something different. And so I think you really have to go into it, which is why you have to keep being a learner. And I would say you need some sort of harmony between positive reinforcement and consequences. That some parents, man, they are consequence heavy. And and always have a consequence you can live with. Right? That you're not going to take their phone for the rest of their lives.
I think some of my kids are still grounded the rest of their life.
I know. We say things in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
And we need to be careful with that. But, I think having consequences, finding what hurts, not like, we're not talking abuse, obviously.
Right.
But finding what gets to them. Because, for one of my children, taking their phone is like, okay, please take it. Another one was like, you just took my lifeline away.
Yeah.
It's finding the things that are, if it is a timeout, it may be one kid, it may be go sit in timeout. Another kid, it may be, I need you to walk up and down the stairs 30 times before we talk.
Yeah.
That finding those things that get them from a consequence that makes them pause and think and always follow up.
Yeah.
Always follow up with a conversation. Give a consequence, but then talk through the reasons why. Talk through, what was happening. And if they don't understand it yet, send them back. But getting them to talk and communicate, because that's going to help them understand their behavior. It's going to help them communicate better as adults when they have a job and there's conflict. But just learning the why behind. You want to get to, I always say, I heard this analogy once where you see the boiling pot of water. And we focus on why is the water boiling, but really it's what's the gas that's feeding the fire that made the water boil. Usually the result of the behavior you're seeing is that's just the aftermath of something going on internally.
Yeah.
And those are great moments. And it's hard because we're emotionally engaged at that point. But having those, but then also finding positive reinforcement of what are some things. I mean, you have the old sticker charts when they're younger. And as they get older, there's still things. They like to go out to eat. They like Chipotle and those things and say, for their grades or for certain behaviors, hey, when we see this, this is the award you get. It's still not little toy things like when they were kids, but as they get older, there's still things that are positive that can get their attention.
Yeah. I like what you said there. The verse that came to my mind while you were talking there was, "Fathers, don't exasperate your children."
That's right.
understanding the fuel that's feeding the boiling pot comes a lot from what you've been talking about already, the prayer side, the modeling side, the listening side, because when I'm really listening, I might get some clues about what's really going on.
Right.
And it keeps my discipline from being exasperating. Most kids know that it's coming. Most kids know that, as long as we set that pattern and establish that kind of love in their life, they can see that. But knowing that informs us about whether should this be a negative thing or should this be a positive thing. And I think that's
right.
one of the things that a lot of parents struggle with. When is the consequence negative, and when does the vision need to be cast for the positive side?
Yeah.
And I think what I hear you saying is it depends, of course, as you're saying, it depends. But it is that living and understanding with your kids, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I would also say that's another place where when you're in a group and you're supported by other people, whether it's multi-generational group with older or younger people around you, or people that are all in a similar stage, talking with that group. I mentioned to you once that, I do this for a living and talk with families and encourage them along these lines. And when we've had situations with our kids, all of a sudden I feel numb.
Yeah.
And I go to people and say, what do you think? How do you process this? You and I have had those conversations. I have another mentor that I go to and just say, hey, help me make sure that what I'm doing, what am I not seeing? What are my blind spots? How can I help my kids better? I think it's important to ask for help, and everybody's going through it. And sometimes you feel like you're on your own island, and you're not.
Yeah.
There are others that are experiencing the same things.
Yeah, we wish there was an ebook that we could download, or a PDF, or a quick start guide, or something like that. But it really boils down to trusting the Lord, investing in my relationship with the Lord, investing in my relationship with my kids, and trusting that God's going to be leading me through this. It doesn't mean you can't learn skills. We need to be learning skills.
Absolutely.
We need to be investing in these ways you're talking about. And it's not fly by the seat of our pants, but it's doing everything we can do to be prepared personally for the responsibility that we have, including our relationship with the Lord and relationship with our kids.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, we should probably take a little time to recap some next steps.
Sure.
What are some highlights? If there's a takeaway or a few takeaways that people want to take from this conversation and immediately put them into practice, where would you point them?
Sure. I would say the first one is what we talked about early on, and that's prayer.
Yeah.
As I said, it's never too late to start praying for and with your kids, even if they're adult children. Maybe it's around a dinner table, but praying specifically. I like what Julie does in marking up the Bible, but the promises of God and what you long for them and areas that you see for them to grow, praying for them that way. And if your kids are in your home, start praying with them now. It'll be uncomfortable at first, but do it anyway. Yeah. And take that time. Leaning into the resources that we talked about, with whether it's the Parent Q app, it's those videos that we'll share, or the tools that we said that were in the library. Yeah. Getting those and becoming a student of the culture that way, and obviously talking at the beginning, really looking at yourself and finding those moments in your rhythm to say, here's where I'm spending time with Jesus. Yeah. This is where I'm going to get that time.
And it's so natural for you, but I want to make sure that I pull out an important takeaway that I think you brought up, and that is get around some people who can help you.
That's right.
People who are ahead of you, and then people who are walking with you.
That's right.
I think that's really important, because you need to know you're not just to commiserate, but to have a little bit of that, but then someone to call you on your bluff, encourage you, get you moving forward, cry with you, and then challenge you. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. That is well worth your time.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thanks so much. I know I appreciate your experience here. Thanks for your heart on it. And even though we don't have hard and fast answers for a lot of this, these are some really good guiding principles so thank you for spending time with us and helping us learn a little bit more about that. And I trust that our time with you has been helpful, and that what you have taken away from this conversation will help you in your own spiritual journey as you grow as a parent, investing in your children so that both you and your children can experience the full life that God has for you. If you don't have a church home, You're welcome to join us here at Grace Church. You can go to grace4ohio.org in order to find out those times and locations that will be helpful for you. And again, we thank you for spending time with us, and hopefully what we've talked about here will help you to take the next steps that you need to be taking to clarify your faith and to experience the full life that God has for you as you make the investment not only in yourself, but also in your children. If you like this video and like more content like this, be sure to like, share, comment, or subscribe.